Welcome to our Understanding Medicaid webinar. My name is Nick, and I am the consultant manager here at Elder Care Resource Planning. In a moment, we're going to be joined by our founder and co-founder and CEO, Michael Guerrero. Today, we'll be discussing Medicaid eligibility, planning, and asset preservation. Our goal will be to provide you a foundation in long-term care Medicaid and Medicaid planning. We want to start today by talking about the why. Why is Medicaid planning so important? First, navigating the Medicaid system is incredibly difficult. It's a long...
Hey, Nick. Hey there.
Hey,
everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Hey, before you jump right in there, you want to get that recording started? Did it get started already?
Yes, it is.
Funny thing, I didn't hear the beep. My mistake.
No,
Hey, everyone,
no worries.
I'll just use that as an opportunity to introduce myself. Like Nick said, I'm one of the co-founders of Elder Care Resource Planning, and I'm really happy to have you all here today. So we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. So save those up. Sorry, Nick. I'll let you get started now.
No worries. It's always good to be, you better be safe than sorry, especially with the recording. There's going to be a lot of people looking to go back and see what was said about such and such Medicaid planning details. So always good to triple check. I was just saying here, we want to start by talking about the why. Why is Medicaid so important? This is it's a complex process. And without some kind of roadmap, people can easily get lost and be managing this process for months or sometimes even years. Second, we can't ignore the emotional toll. When a loved one needs long-term care, it's not just a financial concern, it's emotionally taxing. It doesn't just take a toll on the person who actually needs the care, it also impacts their spouse, their children, and other family members. Finally, the financial impact. Obviously, that's a really important consideration. The cost of care has been rising steadily for a long time, and there's no sign of that slowing down. Whether you need in-home care or assisted living or nursing home care, those bills are going to add up fast. And while I just saw a hand pop up here, I'm going to kind of outline how the Q&A is going to work here in just a moment. So please hold the questions for just a little bit. I'll give you guys instructions on how that'll all work. To the point of the financial impact here, a nursing home might cost you $150,000 to even $200,000 a year. And this is true for even people who did everything right? Everything they possibly could, saved up their entire life, had a good retirement. But when it comes to like paying for long-term care, it can wipe that out, seemingly in an instant. So let's talk about today's agenda. First, we're going to cover eligibility. Every state has different asset and income limits. We are a nationwide company, and we won't get into the details of every single specific state's rules today, but we will give you a high-level understanding of how eligibility works. Second, we're going to discuss planning opportunities. This is the core of what we do at Elder Care Resource Planning. We will show you how to look at a timeline, the runway that you might have before you truly need benefits, and how to manage that time efficiently. We will also talk about how to handle being over the asset limit, and so you can manage that effectively so you can preserve assets outside of the reach of Medicaid in the state. Then we will talk about how Elder Care Resource Planning can help. We will look at a real-world case study that will break down some of the more complex concepts in Medicaid planning and asset preservation. Finally, we will discuss next steps. We'll show you how to get in touch with our team. We'll open the floor to questions, and we'll cover as many of those questions as possible. For that Q&A, I want to draw your attention to this symbol right here. It is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you click that, it will bring up a side panel, and about halfway down, you will see a button that says Q&A. You can plug your questions into that Q&A section throughout the presentation. So, don't hesitate to put those in as we're talking about different things. As they pop into your head, you can put them in that Q&A section. As a side note, though, please include your state in your question so that we can address your question based on your specific circumstances. With that, I'll turn the floor over to Michael Guerrero. Like we mentioned here, he's our co-founder and CEO. He's also a certified Medicaid planner. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks a lot, Nick. And thanks everyone for joining again. This is tremendous. I love to see so much turnout for this event. So in 2015, my brother, my mother, and I got together, and under very unlikely circumstances, we started our own company. The idea was my brother's idea. He felt that there was a huge opportunity to meet the need for information in the market for families about long-term care and how to pay for it. There's people that work on other different things. Of course, there's financial advisors out there. There's lawyers. There are social workers. But he felt that there was a need for somebody really just specialized in the long-term care benefits and really how to make the best use of those benefits. Not for those who are necessarily extremely poor, but for those in the middle class who are likely to have to turn to benefits for the first time because of that tremendous cost of long-term care that Nick mentioned just a minute ago. So in the photo, that's me, very much younger me, and my very much older mother, who's younger now. She continues to act as an advisor for the business. She is 85 and very much on a program to avoid mental decline. So she is contributing very well to the firm. What we do over the last 10 years, I'll just give you a quick sketch of who we are. Then we're going to get into the content of today's webinar. We're nationwide. We focus on long-term care benefits, and we make sure that people are able to access those community-based services like home care, assisted living, memory care, and PACE programs, as well as the nursing home benefits when that time comes. So those are two things that are a little bit different about us. We're so focused on the community-based services, and we're nationwide. All right, well, let's get into eligibility. And this is a bit of a false start, actually, or maybe we'll call it a false summit, because before we can really talk about Medicaid eligibility, I got to take a step back first and talk a little bit about Medicaid. Make sure we all have a shared understanding of what is Medicaid. And these days, or when I started this business, I can pretty much assure you, I did not really know how to differentiate what Medicaid was from what Medicare is, for instance. And this is just one of many kind of details about the Medicaid program that are necessary to understand so that we have a shared understanding of what we're talking about, right? So let's get into kind of the nuts and bolts. Let me give you an overview of Medicaid itself. Let's go ahead. Yeah, perfect. The Medicaid program, now this is weird. Many people think of it as, is it a federal program? Is it a state program? And the answer is both. It is both a state and federal program. The federal government pays some of the bills, the states pay the rest, and the federal government sets some of the rules, and the states set the rest. And so it is confusing because you need to first understand the overarching framework that is established by the federal rules, and then within that, within that, be able to understand the details for that specific state. Each state sets their own eligibility criteria within the federal guidelines. Medicaid is not just about long-term care, although that is today's focus of our webinar. Long-term care is a pretty big component of any state Medicaid program. About 40% on average of the expenditures within each state Medicaid budget go to long-term care. But Medicaid also serves other programs, has many other programs for new mothers. They have programs for the disabled. They have programs for people who are just between jobs and need health insurance to make sure that they don't go without. So Medicaid can provide a lot of different solutions, medical assistance essentially for folks, but we're talking about these specialized set of benefits within Medicaid that have their own criteria. How do you get it in, and then how do you use those benefits? So again, long-term care is carved out from the rest of medical services, from the rest of healthcare. And we need to think about it really as its own thing within the bigger picture of Medicare, Medicaid. And so you'll think of it, I mean, one of the ways I kind of imagine long-term care is, hey, this is something that has to happen every day. It's generally focused on those basic needs that you have every day. And so it can be provided in home, it can be provided in assisted living, it can be provided in independent living, nursing home, PACE programs, you name it. The services and supports available to people to get their long-term care provided are very diverse. Okay, so let's take a jump forward to now talk about some of the requirements. Now we have an idea of what Medicaid is. You know, it's a state-based, each state runs their own program. Within those state programs are the specific long-term care programs. Now we're going to dive in deeper. So it's like we're almost like we're zooming in. We started really high level with the whole picture of Medicare, Medicaid. Then we jumped into just Medicaid. Then we jumped into just the states. And then within the states programs, there are all these long-term care programs. Long-term care, Medicaid, has its own eligibility criteria, and they take into consideration the fact that long-term care is tremendously expensive. So you actually could be much more wealthy and still be in an impossible financial situation when it comes to paying for your long-term care. So it's actually easier to qualify financially for long-term care Medicaid than it is to qualify for other Medicaid programs. But here's the catch. You got to really need long-term care, right? It's not just, oh, I have long-term care. I'm just going to take this easier pathway to Medicaid. No, first of all, you've got to establish the need for long-term care. So obviously, this is a really difficult thing to do. And when you think about your elderly loved one, a grandmother, your mother, your spouse, your husband, their care is very specific to them. But we have to have some sort of standardized definition, right? So the federal definition revolves around initially just physical assistance that somebody might need. Do they need assistance going to the bathroom? Do they need assistance getting dressed? Do they need assistance eating their food? Do they need assistance going to the bathroom or getting showered? Do they need assistance just getting out of their chair or getting out of bed? These are the activities of daily living, and these are the ones that are really going to come down to defining if the answer is yes to two or more of these activities where you need assistance, then you may already qualify for Medicaid. But as you can imagine, it's not so simple, right? We have situations that are, well, dad or mom can kind of take care of themselves, or they have been taking care of themselves, but it's bit of a mess over there, or the yard work's not getting done, the cleaning's not getting done. There are any number of things that we do around the house, right, or in our home that are, I would say, pretty darn important, but are not on this short list of 5 items. Um, Cooking, taking out the garbage, uh, getting, just cleaning, doing the laundry, yard work, and any number of other things, paying bills. There's a really essential tasks, but there you go. What do we call those? We call them instrumental activities of daily living. They're not on that 5 list, and therefore they're not part of that essential criteria that define whether a person needs long-term care. Okay, now, so that's the bad news. It's like you can have a situation where somebody's really just not getting along on their own, but on the other hand, they're also able to handle their own personal care items like bathing, dressing, toileting, transferring. Now, there are situations where dementia is present, right, or some form of cognitive impairment, and that can kind of cut across all of this. They might be able to be physically able to do all the things that they would do normally, but they're also, because of that cognitive impairment, they're not safe to be left alone, or they're not able to understand how to eat properly, or when to take a shower, or how often to change their clothes, or where their house is, or how to get back home. And so this means that they may actually need a level of supervision that would mean that they really do qualify for long-term care. And now, the long-term care state eligibility criteria also include the option that somebody is suffering from dementia or suffering from some form of cognitive impairment, like a traumatic brain injury, and this leaves them really dependent and needing supervision. So there is an acknowledgement that it's not just about the physical impairments or frailty that someone might present in older age, but there's also that mental clarity that they need to be able to live on their own, and that can also qualify. Functionally, or process-wise, Medicaid's going to examine the applicant either in the nursing home through a nursing home set of criteria that establish their level of care at the nursing home, or they're going to do an assessment in their home or in their living situation as part of the application process to determine, do they meet these functional requirements or not? And so this is really important. So you got to meet those functional requirements first, and then we can talk about the financial requirements. As Nick said in the beginning, hey, look, Medicaid is super complicated, and each state really sets their own rules. And so I wish I could say exactly what your state was, and I can. But for today's presentation, because we have people visiting us from all across the country, we're going to talk in general about income limits, asset limits, and then the special rules that apply to married applicants. Okay, these rules are, I'll make sure that you understand where the federal rules apply, and therefore they're standardized, and where there's some degree of state variation. Okay, income limits. Income limits are really all across the board, but they do converge. More than 40 states adopt a special income limit for long-term care benefits. And this income limit is expressed as a monthly gross amount, okay? $2,982 is your monthly income limit for 2026. It changes every year. It's actually keyed to the cost of living adjustment. So keep that in mind each year as your Social Security benefits or as your loved one's Social Security benefits are adjusted for cost of living. There's going to be also an adjustment to the income limit. So that's why you get that crazy number, 2982. This year, next year, it'll be probably 3,000 something. This is a monthly limit, and it's expressed as a gross limit. So anyone that's over before any deductions like health insurance deductions or taxes are taken out from their income means that they need to address this income requirement in some way, an important way, right? Don't forget to use the Q&A box for your questions, because I want to make sure we get all those questions answered, as many questions as we can at the end. Okay, so if you're over the income limit, two ways that the states handle this. One is you use a special, specific income trust that is established and available through that state. You fill it out and you open an account in the name of the trust as part of your application. If you thought the application itself was not hard enough, you also have to go out and create a trust account and dump all of your applicant's income into that trust account. Now, there are state variations on that as well, but generally that'll allow somebody to overcome an income problem, so to speak, by establishing a trust account in states where that is allowed. Now, in other states, they're known as the medically needy states. These states examine your spending on care and medical expenses and see if it's significant relative to your income. So if you have a high income, higher than the income limit, then you're going to have to look to becoming eligible by establishing that you're spending so much money on long-term care or on other medical expenses that you should qualify anyway in those states. So it's actually easier to use the trust than it is to use the medically needy pathway, strangely enough. So, and because the trust is kind of more black and white, the medically needy pathway has a little bit more ambiguity associated with it, but that's how you would address an income overage. Again, it's expressed as a monthly amount. It involves many different income sources, all added up and divided by 12 if they're an annual basis, and so that you would compare that monthly total to the limit in that state. Asset limits, again, there are a wide variety of asset limits, but many states, more than half, more than 30 actually, use a $2,000 asset limit for the applicant's resources, meaning in the month in which you want benefits to start, you've got to have less than $2,000 in resources in all of your financial accounts that are considered countable accounts. This is tricky. Some states will look at certain things like tax qualified retirement accounts as not countable. Other states will consider them countable. And there's another complexity. So it's not just do I have more income than I'm allowed to have, or excuse me, do I have more assets, savings, or other financial resources like second or third car than the asset limit. But here we have the additional possibility that your spouse doesn't need long-term care. You have one spouse who definitely needs long-term care, and the other spouse is going to be probably going to stay at home or going to be caregiver, but not so hands-on caregiver, wants to become a Medicaid applicant. That spouse who's not applying has a special term. They're called the community spouse, and community spouses have an allowance that goes beyond the applicant allowance for assets. And this allowance is tricky too. So I know that's not like you came for a simple talk, because obviously the topic is complicated enough. You didn't get the answers you wanted in using ChatGPT or using Google. And so here we are talking about this complexity. It's known as the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. And what it does is it establishes a certain amount that is going to be allowed for the community spouse to retain when the applicant spouse applies. This number can range anywhere from 32,000 all the way up to 160 right now. The exact figures, I should know them off the top of my head, but I can't remember them exactly. These also change annually. That's a max and min. Some states will take the max. Some states will will look at how much you have and allow you some amount between the max and min. Those are called 50% states. Other states will pick a number like South Carolina and just say you're not allowed to have any more than that for the community spouse resource allowance. Oh boy, um, these um, these married applicant cases are very complex, and they actually offer a lot of possible savings. So don't think that you're up against that community spouse resource allowance. There's more to come about that later. All right, so here's the biggest bugaboo, the biggest kind of boogeyman when it comes to eligibility. And this is known as the look back period. So look back period means simply that the state caseworker or county social services caseworker will look or audit all of the previous 5 years, with some exceptions, like California doesn't do a full look back. New York doesn't do a look back for community-based services, but almost all states will have a 5-year look back for their long-term care benefits because it's mandated by federal law. And now this is really comprehensive, and it looks at any time that you might have spent money in a way that was actually really not for yourself. So it could have just been a gift, high school graduation or college graduation for your grandchildren, or your daughter needed a car, so you just bought one. They needed help with the down payment, so you just gave it to them, whatever it is. Or it could have been, well, I sold that boat to my nephew for $2. Well, that actually turned out to be a gift, and so they will look at any discounted sales that you make to friendly parties as a potential gift as well. And all of your gifts will be added up and divided by a single number called the penalty divisor. Everyone thinks that, or not everyone, but many people think that the penalty is actually a fee. Like your Medicaid applicant actually has to pay a fee. No, the Medicaid doesn't charge fees, but they do decline to provide benefits. So that can be even worse than a fee, really, because then you're on your own once you're out of money with regards to paying for long-term care until Medicaid decides to start. Basically, a penalty period will mean that you are blacked out from benefits for a certain number of days, weeks, or months, or years, depending on how much money was given away. Generally, what they're doing is they're dividing about $10,000 a month, but each state has their own divisor. And look them up on MedicaidPlanningAssistance.org under penalty divisors. You can go there. We also provide them on our website as well. But these are updated annually as well because they are based on the average cost of a nursing home stay in that state. All right. These penalty divisors can really be a big scary bugaboo. They basically penalize people who made many innocent and transactions, who had no idea that 5 years down the road they would need to apply for long-term care. All right, well, Nick, let's take it to the next slide to talk about the exemptions from the asset limit. So here we go. I mentioned these before: your home, your vehicle, and any appropriate funeral planning like a burial plot or pre-needs contract that is irrevocable or non-refundable are considered not countable when it comes to your asset limit when you're applying. The home equity cap is waived, meaning does not apply if the community spouse is living in that home. 2027, we're going to expect to see some changes to home equity cap because those were written into the changes to Medicaid from last year, actually. So we've yet to see those changes be fully implemented, as they say, in rulemaking. But we expect that we will see a home equity cap of about $1 million across the board. Right now, though, home equity caps vary from state to state between about 750,000 to over $1 million in some states. The home equity is obviously the value of the property less any mortgages or liens associated with it. So keep that in mind as well. So, and then right now, currently, if the community spouse is in that property, there is no home equity cap. You could be living in a $4 million home. If your husband is applying, they don't count that home. That's federal law, so it applies to all states. All right, let's keep it moving because I really want to make sure we talk about my favorite topic, which is Medicaid planning. Medicaid planning. There we go. All right. So Medicaid planning, I'm just going to pause here for a minute before we jump ahead. And that is, what is Medicaid planning? It's kind of a general term. It sounds innocuous, but it's actually the meat of what we do. We figure out a plan to reach the financial eligibility criteria, save as much money as possible, and do it on a deadline. And that deadline is generally 2 to 3 months from our start date, because the families that we work with are in an urgent, high need for help with long-term care before they exhaust or they exhaust their money. They go beyond what they have and incur debts, borrow from their children, you name it. Medicaid planning is a really intense period of time where we figure out not only what we need to spend, how we need to spend it, what's been gifted, so that we have a plan to pay through the penalty period, or minimize or reverse the penalty period if possible. All sorts of things are on the table, but the general purpose of Medicaid planning is to make that transition from where you are now to the Medicaid benefits as seamless as possible and save as much money as possible in that process. So there, you might say, well, there's asset limits. How do I save money? You just got to spend down and it's all over. And that's where you're wrong. I hate to say it, but that's what happens. Many people just don't understand how many different options there are when it comes to getting ready for financial eligibility. So before we go there, I'll just touch on the why. Why would you want to save money? Quite frankly, the biggest reason, and people seem to forget this sometimes, but let's make sure that as a Medicaid beneficiary, you have some additional resources saved up so that you can afford just a little something else beyond just using all of your income and all of your assets to pay for care. This is about quality of life here for this Medicaid beneficiary. Life doesn't stop when you start Medicaid, so let's make sure we can have a plan to pay for some of the extras associated with anything else besides long-term care, right? Medicaid pays for long-term care, but your income is pretty much dedicated to also your contribution to that Medicaid, that long-term care cost. So where is the other money going to come from for the cell phone plan, or for the family reunions, or the trips to see so and so? Adult children go through tremendous stress to provide care and a support for an elderly parent, and many do it without any compensation or without any desire for compensation at all. But in the process of doing Medicaid planning, we have the option to provide some or a lot of financial resources and protect them from the dreaded Medicaid recovery that takes place after the Medicaid beneficiary has passed away. Remember, Medicaid keeps a bill, and if you have any money in your estate, Medicaid gets paid first before your children. So if your children are expecting, well, we'll get it back from the inheritance when they sell the house, but mom or dad's going on long-term care and Medicaid, there ain't nothing going to be left at the end. And so let's make sure that we get the adult children compensated, especially if there's been some sacrifices made, financial or emotional or physical sacrifices that have been made, that's honor the work that they have done. And then thirdly, I think this is most important, there's a huge opportunity to protect wealth for the healthier spouse. That community spouse that we mentioned earlier can protect the community spouse resource allowance, but they can also protect more. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Um, how do we protect assets? We're going to talk through four of many different options that we have on the table. The list of things that we can help with and design is as diverse as the different financial situations or different situations that our clients have, right? But four things come up, and I think they're worthy of sharing today during this brief crash course on Medicaid planning. One is something we call the modern half a loaf. So modern half a loaf is a very funny name for something that basically will allow us to use a financial product like a Medicaid compliant annuity or a specialized annuity and couple it with a last minute gift. And so what this does, that gift is going to trigger the look back period, and it's going to cause a penalty. And that penalty is going to be a length of time where the applicant won't be able to receive Medicaid benefits. Well, the annuity will be a very short-term product that actually not coincidentally, it's planned this way, has a term or number of periods in which it pays the owner an extra income. And that extra income is actually calculated to cover the cost of care during the penalty period. So we buy the Medicaid annuity where we work with the applicant's family to arrange that they're going to have a penalty period for the gift, and we couple it with the use of this Medicaid compliant annuity. It starts and ends when the penalty period starts, and it ends when the penalty period ends. So it's using some of their money and converting it to income so that they can start the penalty period, because they can't start the penalty period until they met the asset limit, right? That's the kicker. That penalty is only going to start once you're already at $2,000 or less. So that's where those penalties are going to really hurt. Medicaid compliant annuities are also something that we can use for a community spouse. So say that spouse is allowed to have $100,000, but they have $200,000 in their retirement savings, and they need that for their later life. Well, Medicaid would say, no, too bad. You got to spend that on the facility costs for long-term care for your husband or wife. You're going to have to be a lot poorer in later life. And the answer is Medicaid compliant annuities actually can be used to convert the extra resources into income in the spouse's name, which is not counted. And this is really cool. And I'll show you how it works in just a minute. The child caregiver exemption. So there are situations where adult children actually move back into the home where their father or their mother lives, and they are really hands-on caregiving during a period of time. Medicaid says, we're going to carve out an exemption. Normally, you can't give away anything without having a penalty period. But if the child caregiver is a biological son or daughter of the mother or father, they're living together for 2 or more years, and they're providing care in that home for dad or mom, then that home can be given away, and it can be given to that child who did that caregiving work. And then finally, there's a lot of times where family members are actually trying to help mom or dad preserve the little bit of money they have left, and they're paying for odds and ends, things in there, here or there, and they really didn't mean to actually have all that money lost, and so they can be reimbursed as long as they have documented expenses where they incurred things for mom or dad. But this is tricky because you'll remember that the caseworkers will be looking for these transfers or out to family members. And when they see them, they'll automatically assume that's something that they're going to penalize. And we need to show them that it's not the case. It's actually a reimbursement. Mom needed a new roof. So her son wrote a check for $25,000. And then mom could pay him back because it's mom's house and he paid for that roof. All right, so I'm going to wrap up here. I want to make sure we have time for our Q&A. One last thing I'm going to touch on before we get into that, which is this case study I mentioned earlier. Meet Martin and Jane. Martin is at a point in life where he is not able to take care of himself, and Jane is not able to care for him at home. He's going to be having to use a long-term care nursing home. And their plan was to use Medicaid to pay for it. When Martin applied, they denied his application because they still had $200,000. In the state where they applied, their community spouse resource allowance was limited to $100,000. So that $200,000 would have to be spent down to just $100,000. Now, the state assumed that Jane would use the extra $100,000 and write checks to the nursing home for Martin each month for about a year until all that money was used up, and then Martin could reapply at that stage. Jane actually met with a Medicaid planner and discovered that she also could simply purchase a Medicaid compliant annuity today, and tomorrow or next month she could reapply for Martin's care, and Martin would be approved because she puts $100,000 into that Medicaid compliant annuity. Now you might be like, well, that's great, but what is this annuity? This sounds like a fishy scheme to me. This annuity is actually a short-term 2, 3, 4, 5-month product that irrevocably converts that single premium, $100,000, into equal monthly installments for Jane. Medicaid considers that income only. Voila. Jane has not spent $100,000 on Martin's care. She spent $100,000 on generating new income for her. Let's say Jane buys a 4-month product. She gets $25,000 per month with that $100,000 initial premium. There's a little bit of interest, but we're going to ignore it for right now because it's only 4 months. Jane basically gets $95,000 back, more or less, because there's some fees associated with this, of course. But so it's not a 100% solution, but it's a whole lot better than spending $100,000 outright and waiting for months and maybe a year before she can rely on that Medicaid benefit. All right. Nick, went a little bit longer than I expected, but I'll turn it back over to you to wrap up here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Michael. But it was good to get into detail on everything. One thing I'll mention about this case study is oftentimes we gotta go over this a few times in a row because it sounds a little too good to be true. Maybe you got to do some additional research outside of us, just verify it on your own there. But yeah, I'll make sure I make this quick here because we do want to, like Michael said, have time for the Q&A. So how can we help, right? A lot of folks come to us when they are either out of money or getting really close to that point, and they need these benefits yesterday. They can't risk an improper denial or a drawn-out application process because, that could create a liability on the family or, at best, an extremely stressful situation. Other times, there's complexity that comes from making these changes to the estate that we outlined here in the past few slides, right? Moving these assets to become Medicaid eligible. And at the end of the day, these people find themselves in challenging situations because even if they've saved up hundreds of thousands of dollars, if you're paying for a facility, that doesn't take you very far. So oftentimes this responsibility of managing the situation is falling upon the adult children or, sometimes another family member, and they're suddenly thrust into this role to become Medicaid planning experts. And, that's on top of dealing with everything else they have going on, managing their careers, having their own families. And We can tell you from experience that Medicaid planning is a full-time job on its own. So, even if you have all the expertise in the world, it doesn't leave, room for much else at that point. It's kind of all consuming. If anybody's ever gone through this here, I'm sure you can attest to that. It takes a lot out of you. That is where our team comes in, right? We become your advocate and representative in this process, and Medicaid planning is all we do. So we have a team of experts that assist in the financial planning component, the preserving assets, and maybe even just as important or more important, managing this entire application process. So our primary goal as a company, or one of our primary goals, I should say, is to lead with education. This is why we host webinars like this. We also understand that everybody's situation is unique and therefore requires a tailored approach. And to make sure we're achieving your goals, we have to actually understand what's going on with your loved one or with yourself, if that's the case. So we want to understand your unique situation and provide that tailored solution and that handheld guidance to help you navigate the state's rules and guidelines. So shortly after this webinar is completed, you're going to receive an email with a link so you can share or rewatch this webinar. In that email, you can request to be contacted by a member of our team. This will be a free consultation if you choose to take advantage of it. There's absolutely no obligation with this, but it will give you that opportunity to explore your unique situation, see what options are available, and also see if we might be a fit to help. So with that said, let's turn it over to some questions, because I know we already have a lot in the queue. So let me pull that up here. Give me 1 second. And let's see here. And by the way, feel free to continue posting them as we go through this. We're going to get through as many as we possibly can. And so the first question that we have here is going to be from Lindo. What if we don't have any assets?
Yeah, I was also looking at Pamela's question at the top. So the accessing home health care, this is tricky because I wanted to talk about this for just a second. Medicaid does offer home health care. Home health care, remember, is often doctor ordered. It provides essential skilled care at home. This is covered by your Medicare, but can also be covered by Medicaid if you don't have Medicare, or if you are needing additional services that are not covered by Medicare, excuse me. Sometimes we confuse the term. We just mean home care or home aids, supervision or assistance with non-medical care at home. And this is provided through Medicaid. And of course, you have to meet the long-term care criteria, functional and financial. And you do that through an assessment process where you're assessed by a social worker in your home or in your living place. And then you apply for the long-term care benefits in the same way that you would otherwise. Many cases, all cases actually, states provide some form of home care through the Medicaid program for long-term care at home. And then Nick, you asked Linda's question first, so I'll just go right to that one. What if we don't have any assets? That is a tough question, and sometimes it feels a lot of people come to us, mom or dad doesn't have any assets at all. They're really nothing. So we always want to double check that, because sometimes we forget, oh, there's that other account, or there's another vehicle, or there's there's that life insurance policy that we forgot about. These can be countable assets, and so keep it in mind. Even if you feel like there's nothing there, there might be something that is countable. Personal items like furniture and clothing and stuff within the home are generally not counted at all. So don't be confused by that. If you have no assets, then it is simply a matter of documenting that you have no assets, meaning financial verification through bank statements, and don't forget the look back period as well. So even if you don't have assets, you can still be subject to a penalty because mom or dad gave away assets within the 5-year period. So keep that in mind, Linda. A lot to still consider, even in the no asset situation. Quite frankly, those are very risky, and often the financial burden falls on the adult children to cover costs while they're making that transition to benefits.
Awesome. We have a few questions here about the child caregiver exemption. Can you outline the process of applying for that exemption?
Yeah. So a child caregiver exemption is tricky, and each states have their own slight variations on it. However, in general, what you're looking to do is provide state verification that you've met as the adult child living together with the father or mother, that you've met the criteria. Critically, you need to provide proof that you've been living in that home. Proof means some sort of official documentation that you've changed your address. You need to provide proof that mom or dad needed care while you were living there, doctor's records, etc. You need to provide proof that you did care. These are tricky things, and often we have to provide them with circumstantial evidence like affidavits and doctor's notes and driver's license, address change notifications, stuff like that. But when you have all that together, then you can make the transfer, make the deed update, and apply for Medicaid and have that transfer considered not penalizable or not going to be subject to that transfer penalty. So it's really tricky, and yes, it involves not just making the transfer, but also applying and getting it kind of blessed, so to speak, by the caseworker.
Excellent, thank you. Just to give you guys some more insight here, if your question is hyper specific and complicated, then we are going to recommend a consultation to get it answered, because sometimes it's not something that can be outlined in a quick 30-second to a minute answer. So if I skip your question, I do apologize, but I'd encourage you to reach out and have a consultation so that we can really get to the bottom of your question. Susie in Nebraska has a question. Are there a certain number of functional requirements needed to qualify?
Yes, Susie, if I didn't speak to this clearly before, generally the functional requirements are the ADLs, the activities of daily living, and what Medicaid says in general, but not always in states, and then the devil's in the detail in terms of that assessment, but they're generally looking for 2 or more of the ADLs. If you have questions about, I'm not sure if my loved one meets these criteria, we strongly recommend an analysis done by our partner organization called Callahan Care Solutions. They do an excellent job of evaluating the medical records with a registered nurse and comparing them to that state-specific criteria for medical qualification for long-term care.
Excellent. Okay, we have Kim in Florida. Her loved one's income is right at the limit, but it includes VA aid and attendance of $1,558 a month. Her other assets are limited and dwindling due to the cost of an assisted living facility. Will she have trouble qualifying?
From an income perspective, no. If for some reason some of the monthly income were to total more than the $2,982, in Florida, you can use the qualified income trust. So that'll allow her kind of quickly establish that some of that income is going over the income limit, and it goes into the trust. The trust funds then are managed by a family member who's acting as trustee, and they pay bills with them according to the trust provisions. It's a little tricky, but it's actually a pretty elegant solution when it comes down to it. It is only done when you need to apply. Again, some people think, it's a trust, we need to do that in advance, right? Advanced planning. No, do not establish a qualified income trust in advance of applying for Medicaid. Do it at the same time.
That's a great point. You see a lot of mixed information about trusts because there are asset preservation trusts, irrevocable trusts, and then the income trusts that we're talking about here. Completely different, but people will talk about them in the same breath. We have another question here. What's the difference between Medi-Cal and Medicaid?
Oh, great question. And this, I'll make this more general as well, because Medi-Cal is basically the California name for Medicaid. No difference between Medicaid and Medi-Cal, except for the fact that it's California, and there's all sorts of differences between California and the rest of the country. Many states, like Tennessee, uses the word TennCare instead of calling it Medicaid. Virginia often uses the term medical assistance instead of referring to it specifically as Medicaid. Massachusetts calls it Mass Health. There are all sorts of state-specific branding that goes on when it comes to Medicaid programs, but they're all essentially providing the same Medicaid benefits as mandated by the federal government when it comes to long-term care.
Great, thank you. Here's a question. I think it's an important one that might hit home with a lot of people as well. My father's moving to a different state. Can we apply before he actually gets here?
Yeah, yes and no. um, so each state says we provide Medicaid benefits to residents who live in our state. You become a resident the day you cross the border and intending to stay. So you could be at a nursing home, for instance, in a state where you don't live. That becomes your state of residence, and there's no minimum amount of time that you need to be there, but you can't apply until you're technically there, physically there in that state. What you can do, and this is really important, and this is actually much more time intensive, is gather all of the financial and other documentation that's required to support your application. Otherwise, you're going to be scrambling and you potentially will miss out on benefits because you'll have be delayed in either the submission of your application or in the approval time of your application. So prior to move, get your documents in a row and make sure that you're ready for the receiving state's requirements when it comes to Medicaid. But you can't submit that until you're physically there. When we work with clients that are planning a move, we have a project timeline that establishes, hey, that's the move date. You know, it's going to be on Tuesday, and so everything we have to do before Tuesday, we backwards plan and set out the series of steps that need to be done in advance of the move date so that we're ready to submit an application upon the move in. Okay, so it's tricky. No, you can't apply before you arrive, but there's a whole lot of things you can do before you arrive.
Great. What if, this comes from Barbara here, what if I already have an irrevocable trust, which includes a Medicaid asset protection trust? Can I still apply for long-term care Medicaid?
Great question, Barbara. This is tricky because no trust is the same. They're like snowflakes. Medicaid asset protection trusts are supposed to be irrevocable trusts that protect assets. But if you create them and fund them within 5 years of applying for Medicaid, you're going to face a penalty. And sometimes that's preferable to waiting, and sometimes it's not preferable. Let's use this as an opportunity to talk about our trust assessment service. This is a great opportunity for us to analyze the trust, the funding of the trust, the state regulations, and make an informed recommendation about what is your best course of action. Wait, don't wait. Maybe it's not the right kind of trust. Maybe it wasn't funded in the right timeline. We can figure that all out and lay out a plan of action for you. $350, and it really is a valuable service in terms of fulfilling the asset preservation that you set out to do with the initial funding of the trust.
Great. Yeah. Now, what if the primary residence was sold, but we use that money to pay for an assisted living? Do those proceeds count for asset qualifications?
Sure, you spent that money on that Medicaid applicant, so it's their money. You spend it on the Medicaid applicant paying for long-term care in an assisted living. Absolutely, that's a legitimate spend down, no problem there. If you do have expenditures or large asset sales within the 5-year period, you can darn well expect that the caseworker will closely examine those transactions, both the receipt of the proceeds and how they were spent, so that there was no gifting that might have triggered a penalty during that period. Yeah. Great question.
Awesome. We have Maria in Illinois. What services are included in the home and community-based services waivers? Do they pay for supporting a supportive living apartment? And what are the eligibility requirements for that?
Yeah, right up to the wire here. Illinois specifically has a supportive living waiver, so they offer what Illinois calls supportive living. Many people just call assisted living, and those are actually really good services in Illinois. There are other home-based services as well in Illinois, and they provide a significant amount of personal care services or home care aides in providing long-term care services at home. That means a significant number of hours, usually full-time services at home, so that a family member could potentially still live on their own and receive those services in Illinois. So the details, you're welcome to sign up for a free consultation with one of our eligibility experts. If we didn't get time to answer all of your questions today, which we didn't, I'm so sorry. We will do a better job next time of condensing the material and making sure we have more time for questions, because this is really where you get the most value, I think, specifically to the to this talk. We offer that free consultation. So Nick, tell people how they're going to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm gonna try to squeeze a little more out of this because I think Darren had a really good question that I want you to answer for us here, Michael. But you're all going to have that opportunity through the email to request a contact from our team. And, we have a team of knowledgeable people who can answer all of your questions, see if we're a fit to help here and offer guidance in that respect. So please take advantage of that. Send us your individual questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to yours, but Darren had a question about why would we choose, working with elder care resource planning over someone like an elder care attorney?
We're specialists in this space. We've been doing this for 11 years. We only do crisis planning, and we have all the network resources, including local law firms, brokers for Medicaid annuities, and partners like Callahan Care Solutions that do an excellent job of determining level of care. So we're the right people for the job when you need long-term care.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So yeah, keep an eye out for that email with the link to the recording. Like I said, that will be where you can request a contact from a member of our team. Feel free to reach out to us directly. Our website has some great resources. There's also some good resources at MedicaidPlanningAssistance.org. And thank you for joining us here today. And let us know if we can be of help here.
Thanks, everyone. And trust me, our team will be following up with your questions. So we do get your answers. And if you don't, obviously, that's a great opportunity to do the consultation. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.